Hello my dear friends, how is it going? I hope I find you all in good health. I'm Arith Härger and today I'm going to talk about something I've never done before, and quite possibly this is the very first time I'm doing a video about my own person and in relation to something no one has ever asked me before. My first contact with witchcraft. I thought this would be a fitting subject for the very last video of the month of October. So, where to begin? Well, let me just share with you a couple of words before we really start this, because I'm a little bit nervous, as I've never exposed myself like this before. So, if you allow me, and thank you for your patience in advance. By now, most of you already know that this channel was never about me. However, I do understand that once you put yourself out there for an audience, whether you like it or not, it is inevitable people's curiosity. Curiosity is a very useful thing that makes us all want to learn more, but it becomes a distraction when we are more curious about a person's life rather than seeking knowledge about what truly matters and what makes us grow as human beings. Indeed, I'm a very private person, very reserved, and I don't really talk that much about myself, not only because I abhor idols, and many people have the tendency to put others on a pedestal. I'm not here to seek attention, nor am I fishing for praise. I don't want to be turned into an idol. All I wanted was to share and exchange information with all of you, and I praise the ability of freedom of thought and people thinking for themselves rather than just following some figure because they have grown used to such a figure and start to almost worship that same figure. And I don't want anyone to fall into the error of thinking like me. I don't want to teach you what and how to think. I just want you to understand the importance of thinking for yourselves. I think you understand what I mean. Also, I don't talk about myself because I think that is a distraction and people will not pay attention to what is being told and end up falling into the mistake of seeking a guide, and again that greatly shatters the ability to think for ourselves. I want people to pay attention to what is being told and not to gossip. Finally, the position I have taken of not talking about myself led some people to think I'm hiding something. So it's somehow my own fault now. And therefore this led them to take on a self-right to contrive all sorts of silly things about my own person. And those who love gossip do actually believe in such livings of incoherent, delusional minds. I am not hiding anything. There's a thing called privacy. Look it up, Brenda, it's a thing. Besides, not only this channel was never ever about me, but also just because I'm on the internet, that doesn't mean I'm obliged to reveal every single thing about my own person. What I do, what I eat, where I live, whom I have a relationship with, where I sleep, nothing at all. I understand that this is the 21st century and everyone puts on the internet their entire lives and everything they do. I am not that kind of person. I'm not hiding anything. I'm just a reserved, private and very shy individual with a number of friends I can count by the fingers of just one hand and still have fingers left uncounted. That's life. Get used to disappointment. Now, let's delve into today's subject. I thought that perhaps you might want to know a little bit about myself and at the same time My first contact with witchcraft may be an account that will prove to be useful to some of you who might feel, I don't know, alone in this world and end up realizing you and I are not so different and I'm only human after all. We all have our doubts and fears and struggles. Besides, I think this video will be more useful to me because this shall be a sort of therapy as I cannot afford an actual specialist, so why not expose stuff on a YouTube video for all the world to see, right? But seriously, don't let this encourage you to do the same. If you can go to a specialist, by all means do that. Seek therapy if you think you need it. The internet isn't the place at all to seek help to cure your past traumas. Anyway, let's see how this goes. I'm still trying to figure it out, my childhood, and putting the pieces together to seek understanding. So let us begin this Halloween tale, please. Perhaps a little bit of background information is in order. Well then, I grew up in the countryside, in a village with about a dozen houses and no more than 50 inhabitants. It's somewhat a remote village in a valley surrounded by high hills, covered by a very extensive forest, quite isolated, and even though there's been some evolution around here in the past decade, many things here froze in time. I did not have that perception when I lived here until I went into the city and started to have some terms of comparison. It has been quite medieval here on many aspects, some of which quite terrible, not just in terms of basic sanitary needs, but it has been for far too long a very traditional society around here in terms of holding on to very macabre and brutal customs. Police around here was ever inexistent, or any sort of social organism to reinforce law and order. So basically the only law until quite recently was the law of the land, the law of the wilds, the law of an eye for an eye, quite violent in several aspects. I've often heard the saying, hard places breed hard people, although in here I've come to understand the exact opposite. Hard people breed hard places. It has always been about survival. Not only surviving human persons, but surviving the elements, the wild animals, and getting in touch with all sorts of invisible populations of the world that live within nature and all around, within and without. So this is when we enter traditional folk beliefs and magic that allows communication with the visible and invisible others in order to create a symbiotic relationship through reasoning and bargaining in order to survive. Traditional folk magic, or in other words, witchcraft. This has always been quite the traditional space, but I'm not saying this is a witch's hub, not at all. People might have accused this person and that person from being witches, but no one was ever openly calling themselves a witch or anything of the sort. However, there was a considerable amount of surviving lore and traditional folk magic or witchcraft, which helped people to interact and survive this space of existence. So this is when we come to my great-grandmother, whom I have met, dealt with and endured for my first 15 years in this world. I'm not saying she was a witch, not in the sense that she openly self-entitled with such a label, nor do I think she would actually have that conception in her own mind. You see, I come from a traditional Roman Catholic Christian family. People had been converted a long time ago, but living in the countryside and in a remote and isolated place, many traditional and let's say, downright pagan beliefs and religious perceptions have somewhat survived and endured. So, yeah, there's a little church near the cemetery, about 3 kilometers, a bit less than 2 miles outside the village. I myself never went to the church, but some people would go in there, of course. People would go to the church quite often, actually. People had in their houses the cross and Christ. Overall, people believed in God and the mischiefs of the devil. There were loads of taboos, as you can imagine. But combining the traditional limited benevolence of the Roman Catholic Church and the life in the isolated countryside, many old gods and spiritual entities were still around, of course in the guise of Christian saints, and many aspects of traditional folk magic were still being practiced, from herbal lore all the way to spells and incantations and all sorts of things in between, of which nothing was passed to me, and I was a mere observant. Although I've come to reconstruct some aspects of traditional folk magic as I go. This isn't something that bothered me, not at all. The problem here was how medieval the mentalities around here still were, and how brutal and violent and macabre people were, or can be, and very cruel. The problem wasn't witchcraft, never was. The problem was the people and how they behaved and how cruel they were. So obviously, all means necessary are practiced to survive from evil people. It was hard enough to survive the elements and wild animals, or the wilds in general, but mostly animals such as boars and wolves. But we also had to deal with the violence people inflicted on one another. So by means of traditional folk magic we had to protect ourselves, but never to cause harm, but to prevent harm, illness and death. All sorts of beneficial and semi-beneficial witchcraft, of which I knew nothing about and only observed until the day I had my first real contact with witchcraft through my great-grandmother. I am not praising her, mind you. The old hag was tough and mean, but perhaps she was like that because of the place she lived in, and life made her hard and a hateful bitch. The only good thing I can say of her is honestly the fact that she was vegan. All her life she was vegan until she died at the age of 99, almost 100. Completely sane and still tough, mean and very difficult to deal with, so quite remarkable. Even though it was the countryside and food wasn't as easy to get as going into the supermarket and buy stuff, she managed to be vegan and perfectly healthy. Perhaps there was a bit of witchcraft involved that gave her some power. What do you think? Well, you shall judge by yourself after my next few words. So, my first contact with witchcraft was through my great-grandmother. I'm still trying to put the pieces together, but this is how far I can remember, and it's been over 15 years to try to recollect all these memories. So, there came a fateful day. I was perhaps between the ages of 6 and 9. I can't quite remember, I don't think that matters. And at the doorstep of our house there was a dead toad. There are many toads in this place from the nearby streams and rivers, and people have wells and stone water tanks that have been built during the Middle Ages, late Middle Ages. So there's plenty of toads that occasionally assail the crops. This one was dead and at our doorstep, and I distinctively remember that my great-grandmother told me it was a gift from the fairies. So she took the dead toad and went into the field and placed the remains on top of an ant hill. Ant hill with ants. I'm sorry, it sounds strange. Ants. Those little fuckers that sometimes storm the pantry looking for sugar. Anyway, the next day she returned to the field and the carcass of the toad had been cleaned off of its flesh, and only the little bones remained. My great-grandmother took the bones and placed them in a little wooden box, the inside lined with a red velvet fabric. Days have passed, not sure how many, doesn't matter. And there came a night I woke up for some reason. Not sure if my great-grandmother was calling me or someone was calling me, I don't know who it was. But I did get out of the bed, left the house in the middle of the night and went into the fields and then the forest. It was an especially dark night, probably because the moon was behind the hills or veiled by rain clouds, or perhaps it was the new moon, I'm not sure. All I remember is that it was darker than usual, but in a village without light, we really get used to walk in the dark, right? I saw my great-grandmother from afar, and I followed her at a brisk pace. Not sure why I did it, because I knew it was quite dangerous out there, and there were always wolves nearby back then, not so much nowadays, unfortunately. But I did follow her, and I believe she was aware of it. Finally, she came to a stream where people used to wash their clothes in there during the day, and my great-grandfather soaked wood in that stream to easily bend the wood to make baskets and other things such as staffs for fighting the traditional medieval martial art of fighting with such weapons. I will show you an image which is precisely one of those staffs, precisely both the walking stick and the weapon my great-grandfather kept for himself, and it's now with me, and it has been my companion through some adventures. Anyway, my great-grandmother's night walks had come to an end, and to a stop by the stream, and I came to her and stood just a few feet behind her, or on a slightly elevated ground, watching her below by the stream, stooping by the running water, and opening her little wooden box and throwing its contents into the stream. Somehow the toad's bones seemed to glow in the dark. Either that or my eyes were well adjusted to the dark and I could distinctly see the bones in the water. Or maybe I have imagined it because it was the same wooden box where the bones were. So maybe my mind just associated one thing to another, and in my mind it may be just a plausible guess turned into what I believe to be real. But I know that the contents of the box all flowed with the stream, as to be expected, except for one thing, and that was indeed a little bone from the toad. That little bone did not flow downstream and just stood there in circles above the water until it flowed against the stream. And my great-grandmother gingerly picked it up immediately. The little bone was in her hand, and I looked at her, and I looked at her at the bone in her hand, and I saw past that into the other side of the stream, and there was a man in black, or at least a dark figure with a silhouette resembling that of a man, of a male figure. It was like a deep shadow in the dark, like a black stain in the gloom, darker than anything save the forest whence it had come. And I wonder if I did see this figure right there and then, or if it is a fabrication of my own mind, some fantastical encounter produced by my own thoughts to repress some deeper trauma. I'm not sure. I occasionally come here, and the more I come, the more I seem to remember, picking up the pieces and putting them together, and some loose ends are coming together to form a scenery, which in part seems to be pure fantasy, perhaps hiding something else I should remember, but I can't. Be that as it may, my great-grandmother was eager but afraid, or perhaps the sense of fear in the still night was just my own. there was a deep sense of dread. And it's just one of those cliches when you want to move away, but you can't. I seemed to have been frozen in time. And to this day, I'm frozen in that thought. I saw the figure of this man coming towards us over the stream. Such an impossible thing, but that is the image that has chosen to appear in my mind. This figure came towards us, and I don't even recall my great-grandmother at this point anymore. To be honest, I don't recall much else concerning this night after this encounter, this specific encounter. It's all pure darkness, like shutting out my eyes, a blink of an eye that lasted longer than it should. And the morning had come, and I was playing by the doorstep of our house with something in my hands I cannot recall, and I don't think I want to recall, actually. Everything changed after that night. Was it the conjuring of an entity, a visitation from a spirit? Did my great-grandmother summon forth something? Was it meant for me or for her? Did my presence come to interfere with my great-grandmother's plans? Or is it just a fabrication of my own to cope with or perhaps repress something else? I honestly can't remember, but I may yet remember someday. But it took me over 15 years, I think, to put this all together, and still I feel I'm nowhere near to understand what happened, what actually happened. My great-grandmother smashed the little bone into powder. Whatever she may have done with it, I do not know. This is the end of this tale. Perhaps you can figure it out better than I do. But whatever it may have been, there are no certainties. In the past 2 years, I have dug deep into this, not as an archaeologist, not this time, but this time much harder work, I think, the one of digging up the past from one's own memories and trying to find some concrete or plausible evidences in folk traditions and traditional folk magic or witchcraft. I did find something similar eventually, magic with toads, to be more precise, from the western country of Wales and from Scotland. Curiously, and perhaps coincidentally or not, I did a DNA test which turned out to reveal that I'm 20% British, more specifically 3% English and 17% from Scotland, Wales and Ireland. It may mean absolutely nothing at all, but I'm just curious, or it is curious that my research led me to toad magic in those geographic areas. So could it be that my great-grandmother was practicing in that night some traditional folk magic from such countries, somehow preserved through the generations? I honestly don't know, and I'm not jumping into any conclusions at all. I'm certain I need to keep looking inwards from time to time and trust time to reveal all things. I'm not saying my great-grandmother was a witch, although in the traditional sense, and if these had been the Middle Ages, she would certainly have been accused of such, no doubt. But it seems clear to me, at least, that strong aspects of traditional folk magic were still somewhat preserved, even though I'm not fully aware of what they meant, what they truly meant, and what the intended purpose or purposes were. I just keep on digging. And this is it, my real first contact with witchcraft. Not the only one and not the last, but surely an event that marked me, perhaps on deeper levels than what I can immediately perceive. Indeed, everything changed after that, and only the gods know where this road shall lead me. So I do hope this was somehow useful, perhaps just for the sake of entertainment. And I also do hope that those who love gossip do not concoct all sorts of rubbish based on things they do not fully understand. Remember, the wise only speak of what they know. Thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video. And as always, thanks for today. And thank you for today. Farewell.